Nervous system looks complicated with all these nerves going different directions, but let's look at the purpose here. Purpose is to send an electrical impulse, which we're seeing in this video, down through a axon into the synaptic cleft. Now the presynaptic is the part sending the impulse. The post is the receiving end. And across this cleft, neurotransmitters. And I'll get into this story. It's interesting how they're not directly connected and that there's a little space there. We might get a happy neurotransmitter like serotonin, or we might get something that's not so happy but we need to survive. CNS, central nervous system. PNS is the outside of this region. So let's take a look at this. Here's the central, spinal cord, brain. Peripheral, PNS, everything outside of that. There's the somatic, which is going to send impulses from the CNS. So again, we're thinking of the central nervous system. And these tend to be long. Take a look at this diagram. Long and with thick myelin. They're traveling great distances. And they're sometimes going through areas that are moving a lot, so we need them to be fairly thickened. Whereas the autonomic, and look at that word autonomic. This is where we have a lot of automatic responses, so that when the stomach squeezes, we don't have to think about it. There's no conscious control. These tend to be in chains, and you can see here's a neuron connected to another neuron. Two major divisions. One's a sympathetic, and it's not because we're sympathetic. What it does is for the flight or fight. Someone comes at you at the alley with a knife and you take off running. You certainly need a fast heart rate. You need your lungs to dilate so you get loss of oxygen. You need epinephrine and glucose to fuel those muscle contractions. And you don't really care about things like urination and digestion, so those get inhibited. Now we can't exist constantly in that state. So we have the parasympathetic, the rest and digest. And this is where we have regulation of smooth muscles and the digestive system. So the stomach is going to do its job. We can finally digest some food. You can't really digest very well when you are in that flight or fight. Urinary pupils constrict versus they're going to dilate in the flight or fight. Genitals. And this is important for people who, let's say you are interested in sexual intercourse. We need a setting that is relaxing, and that's why there's dim lights and candles and soft music. It's partly to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous division, so that that's not the main purpose. Okay, not just to have sex, but let me put it this way: if a person is nervous or scared or worried, and the sympathetic is engaged, then the genitals are not going to be stimulated, and I think I'll just stop on that. Let's continue on. Look at the neuron, the workhorse here. This is the central cell body is the central structure with a nucleus, DNA, liquid cytoplasm, and all the organelles. Dendrites are the receiving end, so think of postsynaptic. We looked at that earlier. The neurotransmitters are going to flow here. The axon is long and insulated with a myelin sheath, and it joins the cell body right here at the hillock. The synapse that we looked at, it was something like this upper diagram, and it's going to happen at these axon terminals, the end bulbs. They swell and they store these little vesicles with neurotransmitters. Some impulses are electrical, like in the heart or some of the smooth muscles where we need precise kind of actions. But chemical synapse is more widespread, and that's the one that we looked at the beginning. So we have an impulse going in one direction, electrical, and then chemical at the synapse, electrical, on it goes. Let's look at these neurotransmitters that are stored in vesicles. Acetylcholine is very widespread. It's both excitatory and inhibitory. And that seems kind of bizarre, but think about it. Sometimes we need, well, think of flight or fight. We need the heart rate to pick up, but then we need to suppress it during the rest and digest stage. Norepinephrine it regulates mood, but also influences dreaming. So sometimes it's kind of a sleep neurotransmitter. It's not the only one. Dopamine, we have that in strong emotional responses. It's often involved in addiction, pleasure, and some movements of the skeletal muscles. Serotonin, sometimes called the happy neurotransmitter. It does influence sensory perception, body temperature, mood, appetite, and it helps get us sleepy, along with some others. Nitric oxide is different than these other neurotransmitters because it's not stored in these vesicles, and so we don't get a big storage of them. They tend to be picked up locally in the body, such as the brain, spinal cord, adrenal glands, penis. It's going to dilate blood vessels, so it increases local blood flow. Helps with learning and memory as well. Endorphins, people that exercise, they get the benefit from these because halfway through the workout, they start noticing that the pains have gone away because it's a natural analgesic pain suppressor. And it also, like nitric oxide, influences memory, learning, and some pleasure. Gamma aminobutyric, or just GABA, it's an inhibitory amino acid, so it's a little different in terms of its structure. It's like a protein building block. And some of the treatments for anxiety enhance the action of GABA, and I'll mention some of this shortly. Neurotoxins, they're not just in pufferfish and black widows, but in many sources. The black widow, the female has this red hourglass on her abdomen, but when she's immature, it's kind of a brown swirl, and it's the bite. Okay, they don't sting, of course. They bite, and they only inject a very small amount of neurotoxin. I've only been bitten once, and I got a headache and a little backache, and I just kind of sat it out. But if it's a child or someone old, then it's reason for concern. Well, it's always reason for concern. You don't know who's going to respond to that venom. A tetanus bacteria we see here, Clostridium tetani, and there's the reaction. It's going to cause a body-wide tetanus of the muscles. They tend to be stronger on the ventral surface, so we get an arching. This is not, it's called lockjaw. We don't see it as much anymore. We have tetanus vaccines and tetanus shots, really. Procaine and lidocaine, we use those as anesthetics, not just in dental offices, but in other situations where we want to suppress the impulse of a nerve so it doesn't reach the pain center. So see, we're in pain, or just our brain doesn't know about it. It's kind of interesting. Cold therapy can work. If you have an injury, you put a cold pack on there. It's going to slow the impulse, but it's also going to slow healing. So sometimes we want to suppress swelling and pain, but we don't want to continue that more than on and off for more than a couple days, or the tissue is just not going to heal without blood. Depression. We all have these times when a feeling of helplessness, we're sad, lack of interest in things that we once enjoyed, and sometimes even thoughts of suicide. Often there's a neurotransmitter involved, and it's not. This is a complicated area of study because we have these things called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Their job is to prolong the effect of neurotransmitters. Now let me mention this. It's a little review here. Our body stores neurotransmitters in vesicles in the terminal end buds, right? So here's the pre and the post. Now, as someone who takes a drug, and sometimes I'm not talking about heroin necessarily, I'm talking about just some lightweight drugs, they're going to cause a dumping of neurotransmitters across the cleft to receptors, and so we feel great. Okay, so we get this sudden surge of neurotransmitters just flowing across like a tidal wave, and man, we're on top of the world. The problem is we have depleted our, let's say, serotonin supply, and now there's nothing flowing across, and so we're feeling really lousy and depressed, and sometimes the suicides happen during this time. And so be careful about any kind of drugs that are going to make you feel good, because if you feel good, then that means you're going to feel bad pretty soon. All right, now SSRIs are going to try to keep this flow continuous, so we don't get these blips of tidal wave versus nothing. Major depression, that's long term. Dysthymia is episodes of alternating good and bad feelings, which many of us have. But if you have it in an extreme way where you're really sad and really happy or manic, then we have a bipolar situation. We also have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, where we produce melatonin. Our pineal gland produces it during the day, which is not right. It's a sleep hormone. We want it to be at night, but because the winter days are dim and short, then we get this, and light therapy can help, and that's what this little picture is about. Neuroglia, these are, you don't hear about these much, you hear about neurons, but these are the supportive structures. So we have these astrocytes. Let's see, we want to see what these guys look like. Here's an astrocyte. It to the far right, it's going to provide a good environment and some fibers for support. The oligodendrocytes, we think of myelin sheath. This is pretty slick. It's showing the oligodendrite building a sheath over the axon. I like that. Microglia, well, the name is small, and here they are down below. These are going to consume substances, so they kind of are the cleanup crew, keeps the area around the neuron nice and clean. Now that's the CNS, central nervous system, so I'm talking spinal cord and brain. But in the other parts of our body, the peripheral, PNS, we're going to have these Schwann cells, which don't have a picture of here. And what's cool about them is this word regeneration. They, unlike the structures here, they can do some regeneration. Satellite cells for support and nutrition. Myelin sheath. That's when we talk about white matter, which I haven't much in this lecture. That's often due to myelination. Gray matter is unmyelinated. So in much of the brain and the central part of the spinal cord, we see gray. MS, multiple sclerosis, involves the destruction of myelin. So here, the far right, you see the sheath. Now, the sheath is important because look at the diagram in the lower. We have the saltatory jumping from node of Ranvier to the next. See these little spaces, these gaps, and it's super fast. And if we lose that myelin, then think of it like an electrical cord. If you have an electrical cord going to a lamp or something, and you were to shave off, which make sure you don't do this, shave off the insulation, then all that electrical impulse is just going to scatter everywhere, and it's not going to reach the lamp. And that's what we have in MS. It's an autoimmune response where the body, for some reason, sometimes it's viral or inherited. Women tend to get it more than men. A sclerosis occurs, that's the word. Scars or plaques. If the astrocytes were not so effective, what they do is when there's damage, the astrocytes don't like a gap, and so they're going to fill it in. And so instead of having the neuron repaired, we have a little scar tissue. And that's what makes regeneration neurons really difficult, especially in the central nervous system.